Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. Somewhat of a somber episode today. We're going to recall the life of Joe D. Obviously died on Sunday morning, but a beloved member of the Ravens community, the Ravens family, and someone I always appreciated watching as a coach. We'll go into that in some detail. To do that with me is Melissa Kim. Melissa, I know you hold a ton of jobs right now, but I'm going to try and list these out. Bleacher Report, 105.7 The Fan, Channel 9 in DC, and you're going to be a sideline reporter, as I understand it, and do some color for Howard Football as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's definitely a different time right now, I think, than when we normally talk about on the show and everything. But you could tell that the mood was a little different at the Castle today. They had a practice today, and we talked to head coach John Harbaugh afterwards. And I went over to the O-line immediately, and I kind of wanted to see how everyone was. And I mean, even some of the PR folks gave them hugs and everything, just because it really is so sad. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get to a lot of that a little bit, but definitely a somber note for sure, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So he's in his 8th year with the Ravens. He's had a career that spanned 47 years. It's almost exclusively been as an offensive line coach, at least since 1979. He'd been an offensive coordinator a little bit mixed in with that, but he's always coached the offensive line. His career almost transcends any of this, but he's had 15 employers in 47 years, really lived the nomadic life of a coach. With successful ones, they move a lot. They have to continue to get that next job. But 8 colleges, 2 CFL teams, 1 World League of American Football, and 4 NFL teams over the last 16 years, where he's actually been much more stable in terms of keeping employment. I guess that's what happens when you reach the top of a profession. You become the anchor for NBC News or whatever. You tend to keep that position for a number of years if you can.
Yeah, for sure. And you think about Joe, he was 70, right? He was coaching literally until like 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the beautiful things about how everybody is remembering Joe D since we all got the news yesterday morning on Sunday morning is that obviously his coaching career speaks for itself, as you just mentioned. I mean, to be able to coach, especially mostly in the NFL, for multiple decades, I think obviously speaks for itself. And while people have been saying what a great coach he was, what people are saying more of is what a great person he was, what a great man he was, what a great human being he was. And I think that is such a beautiful thing, because at the end of the day, we all spend so much time with each other, right? In this profession, especially whether you're a coach, whether you're a player, your staff, your athletic training, media, PR, whatever you do. But you obviously want to be successful as a team, win games, win Super Bowls. But at the end of the day, I think the things that you take away are what people have been sharing about Joe D is those little moments that the day to day that you remember, that, whether you might not realize it at the time, but, those moments that you're going to remember about some random life advice. Coach Harbaugh shared a story today about how Joe D worked in the steel mills. So that's obviously a concept in my generation, a little bit more foreign, obviously. But he's like, he would start every day with a shot of whiskey. He's like, maybe we should do that in honor of Coach Joe D. But I think that's the beautiful thing, is that people are sharing the kind of person he was, not necessarily about his coaching career.
Yeah, very, very hard-nosed person and area to grow up in, by the way, Western Pennsylvania in the 1950s when he was born. One story was related to me by a coworker who grew up in Pittsburgh. He said, even if you worked in business back then, you took a second shirt into work if you had an afternoon or dinner meeting, because you would get soot on your shirt from the air there. It could not have been good for people who worked in those steel mills, but they obviously drove a lot of American industry at the time.
Yeah. And I think Coach Harbaugh was trying to explain that to some of us a little bit today, those of us that are a little bit more unfamiliar with the times, I guess, is the best way to put it. But yeah, I think the really lovely thing is that everyone's just sharing stories. I mean, if you were on social media all yesterday, on Twitter, on Instagram, anyone who has actually played for him, or even got to know him. I have a friend who actually covers the Bills, and we had talked a little bit in the last yesterday, and he was like, "Oh my gosh," he's like, "Joe D was such a great." He was a reporter, and he was like, Joe D was such a great guy, even when he was here too. So I think you're a good person here. He's obviously a good person throughout his entire career, and I don't know if anyone who's listening, and if yourself too, had read the piece that Jeff Zrebiec did for The Athletic on Joe D
Yeah.
last year. I mean, I was crying reading that piece, just about, obviously it's about his life, but the lovely, wonderful, like, love story between him and his wife too. I mean, they were married for multiple decades. Again, a concept that's a little bit more foreign to my generation right now. But I mean,
Right out of college, they got married.
yeah, you learn so much about him as a person, and you just learn about how his heart, I think, more than anything in that piece. And just from being around him, you could tell right away that he's such a gentle, kind soul. And yeah, just his presence is obviously missed already.
So want to also mention some of the testimonials that were given by former players. Now we hear, obviously, the teammates and other coaches and whatnot. The Ravens organization has been appropriately effusive with regard to Joe D in this last day or so. But his ex-players, the testimonials from Matt Skura, from James Hurst. If you haven't seen them on
James
Twitter,
Hurst,
look them up. Yeah.
Yeah, his was so lovely. Yeah, and even for the guys that, I mean, there's a whole host of guys, obviously, that have played for Joe D. But even the ones that really didn't, even if they spent a season with him, I think that that they certainly were touched, I think, by his presence. I mean, he's a 70-year-old man, literally, like, yelling at you, like, on the sideline. On the field. And I mean, how can you not, what I mean, respect? I think that was one of the things I noticed about him right away. I was like, he's like really in there. Like, I mean, he is not like, he is in there, like, on the pads, like with the guys and everything like that. Like, he was relentless, and you could obviously tell that he was still in excellent shape for 7 years old. I hope to be in as good shape as 7 years old as Joe D was. But I mean, you just, I think Coach Harbaugh mentioned that Ronnie Stanley and Patrick McCary and Tyler Linderbaum had spoken to the team, especially Ronnie and McCary. Those two, they've certainly been with Joe D for quite a few years.
Yeah, you're bringing up additional names that I didn't even have on my list of players I have to add because they're UDFAs. But Patrick McCary, I'll have to include in here. I'm going to go through.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I'm going to miss someone.
So many. No, but there's so many. And I think that just speaks to the depth and breadth of the number of people that he impacted. And I think back, I mean, even the guys that he gave them a resurgence of their career. I think right away to last year's team. I think of Kevin Zeitler. I think of John Simpson, because Kevin was someone who came here and he wasn't really sure, like, where he stood in the league, if he still had a career ahead of him or what the deal was, having been in the league for so long, and he knew that he was getting up there in age. But he said he came here and he said, I feel like I had a resurgence of my career. I feel like I can play again after this. And same with John. John kind of said the same thing, that he came here and his ego, his self-esteem was a little bit in the gutter, and he didn't really feel good about himself. And I think about the kind of person that John was in preseason week 3, and then what he was like, week 13.
Those are really good examples. And boy, with Zeitler, let's talk about him for just a second, because he's certainly a great one. The Ravens signed him for 3 years, $22 million. And it was the thought always has to be when you sign an older lineman like that you're probably going to get 2 for the price of 3 in terms of years. At that third year, he's basically going to retire, and you're going to you're going to lose the value of that year. Zeitler, he outplayed his contract for all 3 of those years, including the last one. And it was really surprising that the Ravens, it's a little surprising to me, honestly, the Ravens didn't try and sign him, given what the Lions got him for. But great way to keep a player like that motivated. And I think Zeitler probably will remember as fondly as where he earned his first Pro Bowl was with the Ravens. So yeah,
his wife had posted about it yesterday. Sarah had posted about it yesterday, about what a great family man Joe D was, and I think that a lot of the guys can certainly speak to that as well. Um, I mean, his three daughters, obviously, if you read in Jeff's article, I have not had the opportunity to meet them, but
Mhm.
obviously, Coach Harbaugh said today that they have been here. They've been with him the entire time that he was in the hospital. And I mean, obviously, so I mean, yeah, I mean, you could just tell the mood today. It was a little bit quieter, when we walked out there. Um, you could definitely tell that this is impacted. And here's the thing too, is like it didn't just impact guys on the offense, not just guys on the offensive line, but even like the defensive guys tweeting and posting about what an amazing guy that Joe D was too. Even guys that didn't play that aren't here anymore. Patrick Queen posted about it. Geno Stone posted about it. Geno Stone actually, I think, from
Defensive
the
players.
same, Western PA area that Joe D is from as well. So I think that truly you can tell about how much he impacted these players on this team. And you can see it transcended even just outside of his own position group.
Yeah, I think Matt Skura, I believe he must have went to Duke after Joe D had already left there, but there was a they still understood who he was in terms of
Oh yeah.
offensive line play at that school in a big way. But I'll give you a quick list of the players he coached in Baltimore, and it's, I mean, think about it, there's only 5 offensive line positions, and it's only been 7 full years. This is his 8th season he's been going to, but he coached Rick Wagner, James Hurst,
Mhm.
Jermaine Illuminor, Ryan Jensen, Matt
Oh, there you
Skura,
go.
Ronnie Stanley, Bradley Bozeman, Orlando Brown, Ben Powers, Ben Cleveland, Patrick McCary, John Simpson, Kevin Zeitler, Tyler Linderbaum, and Marshall Yanda. That is an unbelievable group of 16 linemen over that period. And the Ravens graduated most of those guys into free agency with the opportunity to make big money, or a number of them. Ryan Jensen, huge contract.
Mhm.
Orlando Brown made a lot of money. Ben Powers has made a great contract from the Broncos. Kevin Zeitler got paid again from the Lions. Rick Wagner made a lot of money from the Lions. So, anyways, these players, I think they understand just how valuable he was to them personally, and in terms of generational wealth that he helped them acquire.
And you look at that list of names and you see guys who are Hall of Famers, guys who are potentially Hall of Famers, in the future too. And I think that that just shows you, again, we're talking, a lot of people had mentioned, his coaching career and all that stuff. But I think coaching, obviously, when you talk to some of the great coaches and the head coaches I've covered before, it's obviously about, the bare minimum is football, teaching these guys to be better football players.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so much more than that. It really, really is so much more than that, because you get to know guys and their families and what they're going through in life. Because again, you spend so much time with them. And I remember, because I've definitely spoken to a few of the guys about Joe D before, because I'm like, in my years, I'm like, this is insane for me to be watching a 70-year-old man out here, getting on the pads, like with these guys who are literally 50 years younger than him. And so I would always ask them, I'm always like, tell me about Joe D. Just tell me, what's he like? And I remember, I think it was John or someone, or Tyler, like, he's the GOAT. I mean, he's obviously the best. Like, he's just out there. He's like, you would never guess that this man is 70 years old, when he was out there at the time. And he's just such a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, and energy, the energy level, which I think you're capturing with this, is incredible. He's very much a stickler for details, and it's just, if anything would not go right, or even when it did, he'd be energetic about teaching that next rep. He was always a very old school guy in terms of these half line reps, and in fact, building up individual players into half line reps and working from there. But he would step right down, big stickler for footwork. Okay.
Yes.
And you don't think about that being the most critical thing unless you do like I've done and go back to watch the 2005 Ravens bumble around with their footwork and trip each other on poles and step on the quarterback's feet all the time. But he always knew where that first step was supposed to go, where the second step was supposed to go. It did not like wasted steps or pity pat steps. Always very big on that.
Yeah, and here's the thing too. If you did something wrong, Joe D would definitely let you know, because I have seen him yell with, like you said, adjust as energetically as he would compliment them. I have seen him yell and say some words not fit for this broadcast, at some of these guys too when they're not doing something wrong. So, he was definitely tough. Like, don't get it wrong. I think John was the one that told me, he's like, if you mess up, like you will certainly hear about it. So, I mean, I think that just encompasses the kind of person that he expected perfection.
Just to take you back here, not too many practices ago. This was within, this has been in early August because he was definitely there, but he lit into Daniel Fa'alele.
I was just going to say that too. That was one of the guys that he definitely got onto him a lot. And I have seen that so much.
But you know why that is? Why I think that is anyway? He believes in Daniel Fa'alele. He wants him to be the best he can. And he's his selection to play right guard. I really believe that. That he wants him to be the next right guard. He says he'll get a size. I asked him at the podium about footwork and hand usage. He said his footwork's not bad, and he had to really struggle through to not say something not kind about his hand work. But it's clear that he sees things in him that can make him a good offensive lineman. And I think at some point we have to accept that his judgment has been pretty damn good in the past. And although I'm not I'm not enormously optimistic about Daniel Fa'alele's future in the NFL, frankly, if Joe D is, I should take that as very strong evidence.
Yeah, there's things that Joe D can see that really only comes with experience, right? Things that you or I probably cannot see. And I think that Fa'alele was definitely one of his projects. Like, I think one of his people that he really guys that he really wanted to see succeed. I really hope that he does. I think that sometimes with Daniel, you have to instill a confidence in him that he necessarily doesn't really have in himself just yet. You think about it too, he's a couple years out of school. He's so young. And still a lot of these times I think about when I was in my 20s and, trying to figure out who you are and figure out that confidence. So I think Daniel is still trying to figure those things out as he goes along. But I wish I had gotten the chance to talk to him before coming on to talk to you. We didn't really get a chance to talk to players today, but I know that Daniel would have a lot of things to say about Coach Joe D. We'll get to talk to them in open locker room next week, but I know that's certainly going to be a big topic of conversation. And yeah, I think last year I talked to Ronnie Stanley about Joe D because I think Joe D was coming on some kind of milestone that I can't quite remember at the moment, but I was like, anything like you want to say about your coach and whatever. He's like, Joe D is, he's an incredible human, just a wonder. Like he didn't even say really anything about like the coaching stuff of it. He was just like, he's like literally like the way that the way that he talks, it's almost like having your grandpa, coach you throughout a little bit too. And I think a lot of the guys find that endearing, you know what I mean? I think I find that truly endearing. So, just all the memories have just been so lovely.
We watched a few years ago when Patrick Queen was in his second year and he wasn't playing on special teams. And the Ravens had Rob Ryan come in and be the linebacker.
Oh, yes. Coach. I remember that. Yep.
So Rob Ryan had to basically try and relate to Patrick Queen. There was obviously an enormous divide between these two human beings. Rob Ryan would waddle around and move this towel around with his foot to try and show Patrick Queen where to basically stand. And Patrick Queen was like literally would lean against a donut while special teams drills were going on. Tackling donut, I'm talking about. And it was not a good sight to see these two clearly not connecting. I never felt like Joe D had that kind of a divide between his players. I felt like he's very unusual in the respect of an older and oftentimes this is the case, a white male trying to relate to younger men of who maybe of color or may not, but either way, they have huge generational divide.
That's an excellent point, actually. I didn't really think about. But I distinctly can see. I know exactly what point you're talking about when you were making the point with about Coach Ryan and Patrick Queen, because I distinctly remember watching that and being like, this is I don't know that this is gonna work. I don't know if this is gonna work out. But that's an excellent point, because you think about, again, transcending generations. The world has changed quite a bit since Joe D first started coaching, obviously. And the fact that he was able to stay relevant, right? I think that's the big thing, staying relevant with these players. And one of the things I love so much about football is how much the game evolves, right? You're always learning. It's always going to be a new challenge. It's never stayed stagnant. And the fact that someone is able to stay in the league for so long and adapt with those changes, I think that's so important too, not just in terms of even just relating to players, but in terms of the game. Because obviously the offense, I mean, the basics are the same right across the board in any position, really. But especially, the O line, which is a foundation, which arguably is the foundation of any offense, and on different teams too. You know what I mean? Going through different like coaching schools of thought, like transcending that as well. I think that, I mean, it's something to be said for sure for someone to be able to do that.
I think we'll look back on this as him being one of the real architects of Greg Roman leading this into a new era of run offense and frankly of assimilating Lamar Jackson into the league.
Yeah.
A lot of that is Greg Roman, but it's the most prolific rushing attack in NFL history over the last 5 years. A lot of people deserve some credit for it. Don't get me wrong. But if you in any way downplay what Joe D'Alessandris did to help Lamar Jackson succeed in this league, I think that's a fool's errand. I think that his contributions to making sure the offensive line did what they could to allow Lamar to be as great as he's been has been very special.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you could tell that he wasn't just one of those coaches that obviously that stuck to his own position group too. You could see him being jovial, I think, across the board, especially with some of I think some of the bigger guys too, some of the tight ends, and Pat Ricard, of course, as well too. So he was definitely someone that wanted. I don't think that just wanted to stick to like being with the O line, but obviously wanting to get to know everyone. And I think that's speaking volumes. Like we're hearing from the defense guys too about what a great guy Joe Gaudet was.
It is great to see all these testimonials. Let's transition a little bit and talk about George Warhop, who's coming in now, hired basically the day that Coach. No, it's before he went to the hospital. Actually, it's between the time yeah. And he's brought in, has one of the biggest challenges in Ravens history ahead of him in terms of replacing 3 positions on the offensive line in 1 year. With Joe D, maybe that wasn't an insurmountable task. George Warhop has almost as much experience. He comes in having even more NFL experience and a very similar resume in terms of being a bajillion different jobs in about 4 different leagues. But he faces a real uphill challenge. Have you interacted with George at all since he got here?
I have not, but I did watch it. I've been watching quite a little bit, obviously, as we know, because of those 3 holes left in the O-line. The O-line is getting a lot more attention, I think, than it normally would in an off-season, preseason situation. I was definitely paying a lot of attention to him today, and he's just as tough on those guys as Jody. That's what I noticed today for sure. He was yelling and getting in there too. So obviously, in his couple, I mean, he hasn't missed a beat in terms of picking up of where Jody left off. He's definitely on Daniel Faalele a little bit, but today, but he was just as complimentary when he was doing well. But I think that is certainly a huge challenge. This would be a huge challenge for any team, I think, right now, for any offensive line coach, for any offensive coordinator, filling 3 big holes at O-line. Is really tough. I mean, I just don't know what other way there is to put it. And Coach Harbaugh did say today that he's made some decisions on starters. We are obviously not privy to that information. I don't know if anybody outside of the locker room really is, obviously for reasons of strategy against the Chiefs. But I mean, look, there's going to be some whether it was going to be Joe D or Coach Warhop. I think there's going to be some growing pains, you know what I mean? Even when it comes to the starting offensive line. And I will admit that what I saw against the Packers did not necessarily instill confidence in me at all, in terms of how I feel about the O-line. But I do think that it's going to be a bit of a process is the best, kindest way that I can put it.
All right. So there were some early retirements in that game. I think I've got a pretty good handle on who's going to be starting in the game.
Yeah.
The only question for me is really right tackle, is whether they'll just rotate initially between Rosengarten and McCary, or if they'll give the job entirely.
No, the thing is like, here's the thing is like, I understand the McCary situation, right? Like, obviously, like, I'm sure he wants to start games. You know what I mean? You want to be a starter in the NFL, obviously. But for me, like, it's almost like a weird thing, right? It's almost like you're too good at like everybody else's job to like give you just like one person's job. You know what I mean? So when you're talking about like rotation, maybe they kind of like ease Rosengarten into that role, because like, God forbid somebody else, knock on wood, gets hurt, like whatever. McCary's gonna have to be the guy for the most part. You know what I mean? That's always been his role. So I don't know. I don't love that he would be the permanent starter. I'm sure he would disagree with me, but I think that there are definitely going to be some growing pains. But yeah, I think the other positions are pretty set in stone in the minds of everybody else as well.
All right. Well, Melissa, absolutely a pleasure talking about this with you, although not a pleasure to have to talk about this with you. But, I've been to a lot of funerals, it seems like, over the last few years, and I like them when they're celebrations of life. And it's very easy to have that for someone like Joe, who had so much positive and so many people who loved him. So I appreciate you talking about that with me. Why don't you tell folks, first of all, where they can talk football with you online, but also where they can see your work?
Sure. Really quickly, before I get to myself in a second, Coach Harbaugh did mention after he got off the podium today that his 3 daughters, I think there's going to be a funeral and celebration of life up here or down here in Baltimore. And I do believe that it is open to everybody. I think he said that fans and all that too. So definitely keep an eye out. I'm sure that this team will tweet it or put it out on social media, but he encouraged, the media to attend. And I think that, because for all the people that loved him, and, this team really could use a little bit of, I think, remembrance on this for sure too. So so me, back to me for a hot second. So I'm doing social. You can watch me on Bleacher Report social accounts. Listen to me on The Fan on Friday nights and post game after Ravens games. Nobody here cares about Channel 9 because no one lives in DC. And then I will also, if you are a fan of the Howard University Bison football team, I will be doing some color and sideline for them on ESPN Plus this season for home games.
All right. Outstanding, Melissa. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study Short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I want to hear from you about a topic you're passionate about. Do have a little bit of time before the season starts to record 2 or 3 of those. Hit me up with your idea. Melissa, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much. A pleasure as always.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.